Hello and good day. I thought on this day we talk a little bit about quick ways to access and utilize client resources. I'm kind of talking about this today because I recently did a workshop in which I was talking about shifting context to where we have to move our clients out of their limiting pathology context into resource driven, directed context. And on the break, someone came up and asked me, well, I get what you're saying, and I know intellectually how to do it, but it's like when it's all happening, how do I get people to shift out of those kind of impoverished ways of seeing the world and connect back with those things that help them solve their own problems? So I thought, that's probably something that happens to us when we're in session. We get as one of my mentors says, you get hypnotized by the client's problem instead of being able to break out of the frame of that problem, move into a different frame. So I've kind of come up with an acronym that helps me and hopefully will help you to kind of maybe a mental checklist as to places you could find resources. And the acronym is VIBES, VIBES, VIBES. And VIBES essentially stands for values, identity, behaviors, environment, spirituality. Each of these offer areas in which we can quickly pull something out or reconnect a client to a resource which can directly or indirectly assist them in solving whatever problem they're trying to solve. So let's start with the first one, values. To me, values are whatever's important to you. What is your priority? If your highest value is work, that's where you're going to put your energy, your time. That's your highest value. If your highest value is family, that's where you're going to put your energy and your time. A lot of times, I think when people come to us, it's they're either have been separated from being able to fulfill their value, or that they have never been able to connect to what's really important to them. So they're actually living other people's priorities. And maybe part of the therapy is to reconnect them to what's truly important to them. So here's an example. A lady who came to therapy who felt that her highest value was being a mother, and now she's a grandmother. And she was dealing with some problem that's not pertinent to this discussion. And the biggest resource she had was that feeling of being a helpful parent or grandparent. So throughout the session, sometimes asking for her advice. Now, as a mother, how would you fill in the blank? Well, you've seen a lot, and as a grandparent, you see, things differently than maybe you would, at my age. How would you, almost seeking a parental advice from her? And what's interesting is that through that interaction, I noticed that she seemed to not only respond better to our therapeutic interaction, but it's almost like a part of her was starting to wake up a little bit, saying that you do have a lot to offer people. So, let's tap into that innate wisdom of the grandmother or the mother. I had a client one time who unfortunately had lost his wife. She died from, I think it was cancer, and he had lost his business. And his highest value was his business. I mean, after his wife, and he lost his business. So, even though we probably, he expected us to talk about the grief of losing his wife, I felt he needed a resource to begin with before we even got in there. So we started talking about rebuilding his business. He's the businessman. That's his highest value. He is the businessman. And so the whole first session is getting back to business, back into business. And he had a checklist of things he needed to do: see the bank, get the lenders, hiring staff, all these things that were important to him and that were a necessary part of building a business. So over a month or so, he really connected back with that resource of business and got himself moving in the right direction. And eventually in time we were able to talk about the grief of losing his wife and how unfair that felt and that kind of thing, because if he had the resources then. If he had no resource to pull from, I think delving into all of that might have been overwhelming. So I think values are really important, not just in therapy and life in general. When we're clear on what's our priority and we honor that priority, I think our lives go more the way we feel that they need to go, rather than trying to live other people's priorities. All right, so our next one is identity. Identity is how we see ourselves. And in some ways it's similar to the example I sent before of the values and the businessman and the grandmother. A lot of times we have a certain sense of who we are, and when life happens, we become disconnected from that. And if you're from a humanistic perspective, our identity is constantly growing and developing. It's never really set in one place. But if your identity is that you are a teacher, or you are a doctor, or you are a coach, or whatever that is, being able to pull from that to assist you in some other area of your life could be very beneficial. So somebody who is maybe a coach, maybe seeing, how could you focus more in that area? What lessons from coaching do you think could help you with the problem you're facing now? Or how can we shift focus away totally from the problem onto coaching maybe other coaches? So the identity, the way we see ourselves, I think is important. Some people see themselves through the lens of a certain political party, a certain religion, a certain group or clique. And if that's a positive resource for them, we need to access it and utilize it. B is behaviors. A lot of times we have certain behaviors we do that we stop doing because we get a problem. I remember reading in a book about, I think it was Bill O'Hanlon's Do One Thing Different, where he had a client one time who came who was depressed, and she'd been seeing another therapist that for some reason, whether they retired or what, wasn't able to see anymore. And so Bill just asked her, what do you do when you're depressed, in the past? And she told him, and he said, well, let's do that now. Let's do those behaviors now. And it involved like getting exercise, getting out, interacting. And she did that, and then I think the second session felt she didn't need to come back because it's like she had been disconnected from those behaviors that generated a positive outcome. Now, at the same time, people get locked into patterns. I call them like spells. How people hear about you put a spell on someone. It's like we put a spell on ourselves in that we get locked into these limiting behavioral patterns. And part of that getting resource is sometimes breaking up patterns, having a person, whatever they're doing, maybe doing it in a different way. An example would be I had a lady who had a thing about germs, and anytime or health and germs. Anytime she'd hear something about being dirty, or she'd see one of those constant commercials about medications, it would cause an obsessive compulsive loop to where she'd start to have a panic attack thinking about getting sick or death and that kind of thing. So she would have to go to the nearest wall and knock like this, 7 times. Now, as a result of that, it would, after the 7th knock, it would start to decrease her anxiety a little bit. Well, unfortunately, that added to the loop. So it was, have the fearful thought, becomes this fearful emotion, and then knock, and then calms it down a little bit, but unfortunately starting to come back. So she was caught in this pattern. So what I had her do was to simply, anytime she had to knock, to go ahead and do the 7 times. But between every knock, she had to do a jumping jack. I don't know why. It just came to me. So, but she would knock and she would do a jump, knock, do a jump. She'd do this 7 times. And, the side is like, you're getting good shape over the next 2 weeks because you're getting out plenty of exercise. And she agreed to do this. Now, again, we have to make sure that we're not giving our clients something that they're just going to totally refuse to do. We have to be good with our rapport and setting this up so it's acceptable to the client. But her new behavior of adding the extra step started to break up. It gave her a resource. Here's the resource. You can have a little space in this loop so it goes in different ways rather than the way it went before. So that's, a behavior. So there might have been a positive behavior that when you feel this, this loop happens and you go to knock, what's something positive that you like to do or something out of the ordinary you could do, and just see how ridiculous we could be to make the whole thing ridiculous. But anyway, so, we can play with those behavioral patterns, and that sometimes opens up avenues for these avenues for success. So environment is our next one of our VIBES acronym. Environment is basically, where do you spend your time? How do you fill your space? What's around you? For a lot of people, they get so locked in these, we're talking about patterns, but kind of places, situations, that sometimes just either changing things around them or having them get away for a little while can activate that resource. For example, I've had people rearrange their house, paint their walls, paint a wall one color and leave the rest of the walls, and then go back and repaint it. Take a vacation to some place they never really thought about going just to see what happens. Me personally, when I was going through a tough time, I planted a garden. I changed the environment look of my home, which helped me a little bit. It gave me a little resource of being creative, of coming up with the plants, but also the physical aspect of doing something. And then looking at the environment, my space around me has changed, which maybe unconsciously says, if your environment can change, well, you're part of your environment, which means you can change. So I've given couples who fight directives to leave town for 3 days, take off work, leave town for 3 days, and go to some small town that they've never been before. And, just see what happens and how they interact. And they'll find that they still may argue, but they're going to argue less. Why? Because they're in unfamiliar territory. Their environment's changed. So maybe we can talk about the environment at home, how we can change that, which may lead to other changes. And the last of the acronym is S for spirituality. Now, I pull from this quite frequently because it's important to a lot of clients. People from different faiths, different religions, they pull from those religions sometimes when they're going through a hard time. And I think that's something we definitely need to utilize. So just asking questions about, do you have a faith that you pull from? Or do you consider yourself a spiritual person or not? And kind of finding out a little bit about that. Now, sometimes I've found people who have absolutely no faith and no sense of spirituality, and that's fine. I had a young man who was a proud atheist, and which is cool. And he said he wasn't a believer in all of that. So I decided what I'd do is to kind of encourage him, since he was kind of isolating himself at the time, to check out the local atheist meeting. Apparently there's a group on in this area not too far from here that every Thursday night at 7 the local atheists meet for dinner to discuss atheism. I have to be honest with you, I don't know how long this conversation gets. Do you believe in God? No. Do you? No. Well, I guess we're done here. But, it's a get-together, an interaction. And so part of that was, well, if you're an atheist, you might want to check this out. And so by aligning him with people who had similar beliefs in him, plus getting social interactions, and of course these conversations eventually veer away from anti-religion to other things, and we become more human and connect. It's very helpful for him. So spirituality is a big thing. Maybe sometimes folks have stopped going to their church, mosque, synagogue, and trying to, and they used to like to do it. So maybe, encouraging them to go back, or trying a different place, or reading spiritual literature, listening to audio stuff about that. Whatever is, as long as it's in your client's belief system, in their resource, I think that's something really important to tap. So again, the model is vibes, values, identity, behaviors, environment, and spirituality. And you just kind of weave these into a conversation. One of my good friends and mentor, Dr. Rob McNeely in Tasmania, I think he said something, I think it was like part of his initial interaction with his clients as an intake is also just to ask, what do you enjoy doing? Just asking what people enjoy doing, even if they're not doing it now because of their problem. Asking them to go in and kind of, well, I enjoyed biking. Well, what did you enjoy about biking? And kind of getting them to access those mental pathways to pull up that. That's a resource. Well, I enjoyed the quiet when I was biking. Okay. What are some other ways we could get quiet? So, and with the sound of the chimes, I think it's a good place to end it up. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.